Is there a crisis at our southern border?
Senator, there is a very significant...
That's a yes or no question.
There's a very significant...
Is there a crisis?
Senator, there's a very significant challenge.
I think your microphone is not on.
There is a very significant challenge that we are facing.
Yes or no,
at the southern
is there a
border.
crisis?
I believe I've addressed that question.
So you're refusing to answer?
Senator, there is a very significant challenge, and
will you answer if there's a crisis?
Therefore, we are dedicating the resources.
Okay, so you're refusing to answer. Well, Secretary Mayorkas, I'll tell you someone who is willing to answer, which is your and President Biden's chief of the Border Patrol in a sworn deposition in July of 2022 when asked, would you agree, Chief Ortiz, that the southern border is currently in crisis? Answer, yes. Notice none of those wiggle words, none of that equivocation. One word, one syllable, yes. Are you willing to speak with the same clarity as Chief Ortiz? Is there a crisis at our southern border, yes or no?
Senator, I'm very proud to work alongside.
So you refuse to answer. Let me ask you the next question. Has the crisis at our southern border made Americans less safe, yes or no?
Senator, we are dedicated to the safety
Has the crisis made Americans less safe? I don't want a discourse. It's a yes or no question.
Senator, we have a challenge of
You refuse to answer the question. Mr. Secretary, let me show you how someone doing his job answers a question in a straightforward manner. Chief Ortiz, is the crisis that is currently ongoing at the southern border making the border less safe for Americans and aliens alike? Answer, yes. One word, one syllable, 3 letters. That's how someone answers a question and does their job. You're being a politician misleading the American people. Let me give you a chance again. Will you show the same integrity Chief Ortiz shows? Is the crisis at the southern border making Americans less safe? Yes or no?
Okay. Did you just see that? Stay with me, because I have a lot to say about what you just watched. I don't do politics for the drama. I do it because it matters and because real people are affected by what these officials do or don't do. What Senator Ted Cruz just did in that hearing room is exactly what oversight is supposed to look like. I want to be upfront. I'm not here to be a cheerleader for any party, but I will call out non-answers and evasion when I see it. And today we are going to see plenty of it. Watch the full hearing with me. Pay attention not just to what is said, but to what is refused to be said. Because the silence in this video is just as loud as the words. If you care about accountability, about what's happening at the border in the justice system, and with your tax dollars, smash that like button, subscribe if you're new, and let's get into it.
Just to alert the members, and Senator Cruz is next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, welcome.
Thank you.
As you know, as I observed at your confirmation hearing, you had built a long record on the Federal Court of Appeals and a reputation of being relatively nonpartisan. And so I had hopes that your tenure as Attorney General would continue that record. I have to say I'm deeply disappointed in what the last 2 years have shown. In my judgment, the Department of Justice has been politicized to the greatest extent I've ever seen in this country. And it has done a discredit to the Department of Justice, to the FBI, and to the administration of law in this country. Let me start with a simple question. General Garland, is it a federal crime to protest outside of a judge's home with the intent of influencing that judge as to a pending case?
The answer to that is yes, but I also want to at least respond to your characterization of the department, which
Sure.
I vigorously disagree with. I believe the men and women of the department pursue their work every single day in a nonpartisan and an appropriate
General
way.
Garland, there are thousands of men and women who do that, and I'll tell you, I hear from prosecutors at the Department of Justice, I hear from agents at the FBI who are angry that it is treated as the enforcement arm for the DNC instead of upholding the law in a fair and even-handed manner. So you are right, there are thousands of men and women that are doing the job, but it is the political leadership that you're responsible for. So you just said, yes, it's a crime to protest at the home of a judge. Same goes for jurors, by the way, with the intent of influencing a case. But in the wake of the leak of the Dobbs decision, when rioters descended on the homes of 6 Supreme Court justices, night after night after night, you did nothing. The department did nothing. When extremist groups like Ruth Sent Us and Jane's Revenge openly organized campaigns of harassment at the homes of justices, you sat on your hands when these same groups posted online information about where the justices worship, or their home addresses, or where their kids went to school. You again sat on your hands and did nothing. Your failure to act to protect the safety of the justices and their families was an obvious product of political bias. You agree with Roe versus Wade. You disagree with the Dobbs decision. And the Department of Justice under this president was perfectly happy to refuse to enforce the law and allow threats of violence. And as you know, those threats finally materialized with Nicholas Roski, a 26-year-old man from California who traveled across the country, was arrested outside the home of Justice Kavanaugh, armed with a handgun, a knife, and burglary tools. And he said he came there to kill Justice Kavanaugh because he was enraged by the leaked opinion. Now, of course, you're prosecuting that individual for attempted murder, but did you bring even a single case to enforce this law, or did the Department of Justice decide this law doesn't apply if it's harassing justices for an opinion we don't like?
When the Dobbs draft was leaked, I did something no Attorney General in the history of the department had ever done before. For the first time in history, I ordered United States Marshals 24/7 to defend every residence of every justice.
Well, Garland, as a judge, you're familiar with asking counsel to answer a question.
I am answering.
Has the Department of Justice enforced this statute? Have you brought a single case against any of these protesters threatening the justices under 18 U.S.C. Section 1507? Have you brought even one?
Senator, you asked me whether I sat on my hands, and quite the opposite. I sent 70 United States Marshals.
Let me try again.
To defend. And
has the Department of Justice brought even a single case under this statute? It's a yes/no question. It's not a give a speech on the other things you did.
The job of the United States Marshals is to defend the lives of
So the answer is no.
Is to defend the lives of the justices, and that's our number one priority. They have.
Why are you unwilling to say no? The answer is no. You know it's no. I know it's no. Everyone in this hearing room knows it's no. You're not willing to answer a question. Have you brought a case under this statute? Yes or no?
As far as I know, we haven't, and what we have done is defended the lives of the justices with over 70 U.S. Marshals.
How do you decide which criminal statutes the DOJ enforces and which one it doesn't?
The United States Marshals know that they have full authority.
I recognize you want to give a separate speech.
No, I don't want to give
How do you decide which statutes you enforce and which ones you don't?
The marshals on scene make that determination in light of the priority of defense.
The marshals do not make a determination over whether to prosecute. You, the Attorney General, make a determination, and you spent 20 years as a judge, and you're perfectly content with justices being afraid for their children's lives, and you did nothing to prosecute it. Let's shift to another area.
Can I answer the question?
No, you cannot. You have refused to answer the question.
I am answering your question. The Attorney General does not decide whether to arrest.
How did you choose not to enforce this statute?
The marshals on scene.
Marshals don't make that decision.
They do make the decision of whether to make an arrest.
Prosecute someone? No, they don't.
If they make
marshals do not have prosecution.
If they make an arrest, then it goes to the marshals.
Let's change topics because our time is limited. We've also seen across the country violent attacks at pregnancy centers by similar left-wing terrorist groups, including one graffiti of a firebomb building said Jane was here. There have been attacks all over the country. And yet, the Department of Justice has not brought these violent criminals to justice. You contrast that. If you're a violent criminal and you attack a crisis pregnancy center, that is not a priority in the Biden Department of Justice. Contrast that to Mark Houck, who's a pro-life activist. He's a sidewalk counselor. And he had an altercation with someone who allegedly interfered with his son's personal space and threatened his son, and he pushed him. Now, in an ordinary world, pushing someone would be maybe a simple misdemeanor assault, but not under the Biden Department of Justice. If you're a pro-life activist, what can you expect? Well, in this instance, according to Mr. Houck's wife, 24 agents clad in body armor and ballistic helmets and shields and a battering ram showed up at his house pointing rifles at his family? Why do you send 24 agents in body armor to arrest a sidewalk counselor who happens to be pro-life, but you don't devote resources to prosecute people who are violently firebombing crisis pregnancies?
It is a priority of the department to prosecute and investigate and find the people who are doing those firebombings. They are doing it at night and in secret. So, and we have found one group which we did prosecute.
You found one. How many have there been? How many attacks?
There have been a lot, and if you have any information specifically as to who those people are, we would be glad. We would be glad to have that.
Did you personally authorize 20 agents going to Mr. Houck's house? And he offered to turn himself in through counsel, but you didn't want that. The Department of Justice wanted to make a show of it. Did you personally authorize it? And do you want to apologize to Mrs. Houck and her 7 children for being terrorized?
The decisions about how to do that are made at the level of the FBI agents on scene.
Did you know about it?
I did not know about it until the way you're describing it, and my understanding is the FBI disagrees with that description.
Was it a mistake?
Senator's time has expired. I'm going to allow the witness to respond to any of the questions that were asked.
Was it a mistake?
I'm going to chair the committee, Senator. I'm sorry you're not.
You said you'd allow him to respond. I repeated the question I asked, which is, was it a mistake to send 20 agents to arrest him at the crack of dawn?
You had your time and more
You just
than
said you're going to allow him to respond. You just said, I'm going to allow him to respond to the question, so I repeated the question. Was it a mistake? That was the pending question.
You want to ask, I'll ask the questions I want.
That's the question I had already asked.
Well,
You just said you'd let him respond.
I'm going to let him respond right
Good.
now. Please don't interrupt him. Thank you.
The decisions about how to do tactical arrests are made by the FBI agents in the field. The FBI has publicly stated that it disagrees with the description you gave of what happened in that example. That's the best I can answer.
At this point, we're going to...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, welcome.
Senator, good to see you.
You have spoken passionately, and I believe honestly, about your commitment to helping Ukraine defeat Vladimir Putin. I agree wholeheartedly that it is an important national security interest of the United States for Russia to lose. Putin is a KGB thug who seeks to reassemble the Soviet empire at the expense of American interest and at the expense of the safety and security of Americans. And of course, in China, Xi is watching closely to see how America responds to Putin's aggression. I'm deeply concerned, however, that no matter how much you may want to help Ukraine, there is something the Biden administration wants more, which is to re-enter a nuclear agreement with Iran. This administration has shown weakness on Iran since day one and continues to do so. Just in the last few weeks, there have been reports that you again waived congressional sanctions to allow Iraq to move money to the Central Bank of Iran, which the Ayatollah uses for terrorism, for ballistic missile development, and nuclear weapons work. Of course, that's not all Iran is doing. In January, Mr. Secretary, you publicly assessed that Iran had become, quote, Russia's top military backer. That's a quote. And indeed, Russia uses Iranian banks and tankers and planes to move weapons and to dodge sanctions. Yet the administration and the State Department in particular continue to allow Russia-Iranian cooperation out of a refusal to crack down on Iran. The Biden administration is boosting and in many cases funding both sides of this war. If you look at energy, and I want to start with this, I want to ask you about the use by Russia of Iranian oil tankers. As you know, Iran violates U.S. energy sanctions by using its own tankers, as well as a ghost fleet of foreign flag ships. You've allowed that ghost fleet to grow dramatically. The Iranians were using about 70 tankers when President Biden was elected. Today, they're using about 300 tankers. You did not sanction those tankers. Instead, the administration allowed Iran to restore its energy exports, getting above 1 million barrels a day, which is funding the regime and funding the war on Ukraine. Last month was the highest oil exports Iran has had since 2018. Now, we can argue about what that means for Iran, but I want to ask what it means for Ukraine and for Russia. Russia is now using dozens and dozens of tankers from that ghost fleet that the administration allowed to grow in violation of our energy sanctions directly to aid Putin's aggression in Ukraine. Why hasn't the Biden administration sanctioned them?
Senator, two things. First, going back to the first point, the symbiotic relationship that we're seeing emerge between Iran and Russia, to include the provision by Iran of drone technology to Russia for use in Ukraine, and the provision by Russia to Iran, or the threatened provision of weapon systems, including planes. This is something that we are very actively and aggressively working to break up across the government. We have gone after the drone network, working to sanction dozens of individuals.
Have you reimposed the oil sanctions?
And we are looking at the most effective way we can to
Have you reimposed the oil sanctions?
At the Ghost Fleet. So we have imposed sanctions across the entire UAV network. We're looking at how we can most effectively deal with the Ghost Fleet.
Have you stopped the
and
Ayatollah
also
from selling
the
a million barrels a day of oil?
We're working on making sure that we can do that effectively.
It was done in the prior administration. It was this administration that refused to enforce those sanctions that allowed billions of dollars to flow to the Ayatollah that's being used to attack the Ukrainians right now.
We're working every day to enforce the existing sanctions on Iran, even as we're looking at imposing new ones.
Mr. Secretary, with respect, that's not remotely true. The oil sanctions you could enforce tomorrow, but it is a political decision not to enforce it, and you are providing the funds that Iran is using to provide drones that are attacking Ukrainian military, attacking Ukrainian civilians. You said you just noticed recently the growing cooperation between Russia and Iran. If you were not aware of that 2 years ago, this administration has not been paying attention. Let's talk, for example, about Russian-Iranian nuclear cooperation. President Zelensky has repeatedly said that Russia is compensating Iran for weapons through nuclear cooperation. Last year, you signed waivers specifically related to the Iran nuclear deal that suspended congressional sanctions against Russia and Iran, conducting exactly this kind of nuclear cooperation. You recently renewed these waivers. President Zelensky is right. You know that, so much so that in your recent transmissions you wrote to Congress that previous waivers you had issued, quote, would expand Iran's nuclear programs and further deepen cooperation between Iran and Russia at a time that Iran is providing lethal aid to Russia for its use in its illegal invasion in Ukraine. But you didn't cancel the waivers. Instead, you signed them, enabling broad Russia-Iranian nuclear cooperation. Why did you sign these waivers, and why did you do so repeatedly?
These waivers have been in the non-proliferation interests of the United States, particularly to make sure that materials that Iran could use to develop its nuclear program were shipped out of Iran, and to make sure that facilities in Iran would not be developed in a way that could lead to further proliferation or the advancement of the program. In the last instance, we have narrowed the waivers significantly, again, to make sure that they're focused only on activities that actually advance our non-proliferation goals. To make sure that
Mr. Secretary, with all due respect, that answer does not pass the laugh test. Under this administration, you have allowed Iran to get to the brink of a nuclear weapon. There's no work being conducted to make the program safer. Russia is on the side of Iran, and Iran is on the side of Russia. They're both against us. And it's staggering that the Biden administration would say Russia's still on our side trying to constrain Iran. You could halt this cooperation. You could halt the civilian nuclear cooperation with Russia. You could halt the oil sales. But this administration is not willing to do so because of politics. And as a result, the billions of dollars the Ayatollah is getting because of your decisions and President Biden's decisions are funding the war in Ukraine. Why is this administration funding both sides of this war?
I fundamentally disagree with that judgment, Senator. We had Iran's nuclear program in a box. Unfortunately, it got out of that box as a result of pulling out, not by us, of the nuclear agreement. As a result, despite the maximum pressure that's been exerted by the previous
Would you answer the
administration.
question I
continued
asked?
by
Why
our
are you funding
administration.
both sides of the
That
war?
nuclear program has moved forward.
Would
We've
you
been trying
answer
to
the
deal with that
question,
effectively.
why are you funding both sides of the Ukraine war?
We're not funding both sides. We're trying to make sure wherever we can that we're pushing back on Iran having access to resources.
But you're not going to stop the oil
we're-
sales.
We're looking at the most effective way to deal with.
Enforce the
both
sanctions.
of
It's not complicated.
But at this point, recognize Senator Cruz.
Good morning, Secretary Mayorkas.
Good morning.
Is there a crisis at our southern border?
Senator, there is a very significant...
That's a yes or no question.
There's a very significant...
Is there a crisis?
Senator, there's a very significant challenge.
I think your
that we are
microphone is not
confronting.
on.
There is a very significant challenge that we are facing.
Yes or no,
at the
is
southern
there a
border.
crisis?
I believe I've addressed that question.
So you're
Senator.
refusing to answer.
Senator, there is a very significant challenge, and
Will
we
you
are
answer if there's a
therefore-
crisis?
Therefore, we are dedicating the resources.
Okay, so you're refusing
that
to answer. Well, Secretary Mayorkas, I'll tell you someone who is willing to answer, which is your and President Biden's chief of the Border Patrol in a sworn deposition in July of 2022 when asked, would you agree, Chief Ortiz, that the southern border is currently in crisis? Answer, yes. Notice none of those wiggle words, none of that equivocation. One word, one syllable, yes. Are you willing to speak with the same clarity as Chief Ortiz? Is there a crisis at our southern border, yes or no?
Senator, I'm very proud to work alongside.
So you
and
refuse to
support-
answer. Let me ask you the next question. Has the crisis at our southern border made Americans less safe, yes or no?
Senator, we are dedicated to the safety
Has
and
the crisis
security
made Americans less
of
safe? I don't want a discourse. It's a yes or no question.
Senator, we have a challenge of
You refuse to
immigration.
answer the question.
Not-
Mr. Secretary, let me show you how someone doing his job answers a question in a straightforward manner. Chief Ortiz, is the crisis that is currently ongoing at the southern border making the border less safe for Americans and aliens alike? Answer, yes. One word, one syllable, 3 letters. That's how someone answers a question and does their job. You're being a politician misleading the American people. Let me give you a chance again. Will you show the same integrity Chief Ortiz shows? Is the crisis at the southern border making Americans less safe? Yes or no?
Senator, we have 260,000
You refuse to
people
answer the
dedicated
question. Let's move on.
and security of the
Next
American
question,
people.
Mr. Mayorkas. Has the crisis made aliens less safe? Yes or no?
Senator, we are seeking.
So you won't answer that question either.
If you-
It's a yes or no. Has it made aliens less safe?
Senator, smugglers are exploiting.
Has the
vulnerable
crisis made aliens, yes, less safe? Are you willing to answer it?
Senator, the smuggling organizations.
Okay, you're
seek to
filibustering again. Let me ask you this question. How many migrants have died under President Biden?
Senator, your phrasing of the question is actually quite misleading.
How many migrants died in 2022?
At our approaching our southern border?
Yes.
Precisely why we are seeking to
So
exclude the smuggling
do you know the answer?
organization.
Do you know how many died?
I do not.
You do not. Of course you don't. I know how many died. 853.
That is
853. And by the way, here are the numbers that have died every year. You go back to 1998, you see it's consistently between 300 and 400, 300, 400, 300, 400. Suddenly, 2021, what happens? You get in office, and that red line are dead bodies. I've been on the Rio Grande, and I've seen dead bodies floating there who've drowned because of your refusal to do your job. You don't even know how many have died. What do you say to the Texas farmers and ranchers who find pregnant ladies dead on their property, who find toddlers dead on their property? What do you say to them?
I say that is why precisely we are taking it to the smuggling organizations.
But you are not. That is simply not true.
Number two, it is why we are
Let me read from the Wall Street Journal. The Wall Street Journal 2 weeks ago ran an article entitled, "It's like a graveyard. Record numbers of migrants are dying at the border." The story begins with this chilling line, quote, Eagle Pass, Texas. Local officials keep a refrigerated truck to hold the bodies of migrants who drown in the currents of the Rio Grande while trying to cross the border into the U.S. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent that this article be entered into the record. Let me ask you a different question. How many children have been sexually assaulted by human traffickers under the Biden administration?
Senator, this is precisely why we instituted.
I don't want a lecture. It's a question. How many children have been sexually assaulted by human traffickers under your administration?
Senator, this is exactly why on January 5th we announced
Again,
the parole
do you know
program.
how many? Do you know how many children have been sexually assaulted?
This is why we.
Okay, you're going to refuse to answer that question as well. Let's move on. It's obvious you've been instructed to stonewall, so I'm not going to let you. You don't get to stonewall and filibuster. Now, one of my Democratic colleagues before said the Democrat talking point, quote, "This problem didn't start under Biden." Look, I get if you're a partisan spinner, you got to figure out something to say about the absolute catastrophe that has played out under the Biden administration. True or false, Secretary Mayorkas, 2020 was the lowest rate of illegal immigration in 45 years. Is that true or false?
It is certainly the lowest level of immigration in many, many years. And what was it
Okay, fine.
in 2020? What was it, Senator, in 2020 that impacted the entire world, including the United States?
Okay, so your testimony is the reason we had the lowest rate was COVID. It had nothing to do with building the wall, nothing to do with ending catch and release, nothing to do with Remain in Mexico. With all respect, Mr. Secretary, that answer is laughable. And in fact, if you look at illegal immigration, let's look at CBP encounters. You can see 500,000, 500,000, it drops to the lowest level, and boom, what happens? You show up. And that red line is you. That red line is Joe Biden. And you're claiming nothing happened. Oh gosh, this was here before us. No, you made the decision to allow this to happen. Let me ask you, we now have over 5.5 million people who've entered this country illegally under Joe Biden. How many murderers have you released into America?
Senator, I'm not aware of any murderer whom we've.
So you don't know?
Senator, let me say something.
Do you know?
If you take a look at.
No, you don't get to give a speech. Do you know how many murderers you've released?
I'm just trying to answer your question.
How many rapists
Senator.
have you released?
Senator, I'm trying
Do you
to
know?
answer your question.
You can answer, I know or I don't know.
Senator, any individual who poses a public safety threat.
How many child
is
molesters have you
detained
released?
and removed into the United States, from the United States.
Oh, so your testimony under oath, subject to perjury, is that you have not released any murderers, rapists, or child molesters among the 5.5 million. Is that your testimony?
Mr. Chairman, may I have the opportunity
No,
to
you may not. You may answer my question.
You're not
Is
allowing,
that your testimony, yes or no?
Senator, you're not allowing me to answer your question.
I am allowing you to answer. I'm not allowing you to filibuster.
If you take a look at the pace of immigration in 2018 to 2019.
You're refusing to answer. Let's move on. Let's move on to gotaways. Gotaways are the people that get away that you know about. Now, what happened under your administration? Gotaways consistently down at this low line, boom, you get in. And they go from below 180,000 to 600,000. Now, I'll tell you this about a gotaway. You don't know among those 600,000 a year, you have no idea how many are murderers, correct?
That is precisely why the
Correct?
number of gotaways.
Do you know how many of those are murderers?
That is precisely
So you
why.
refuse to answer the question. You know how many are rapists? Do you know how many are rapists? This is a question. You're a lawyer. You know how to answer questions. Of the 600,000, do you know how many of them were rapists?
Senator, this is why we
So again,
are.
the answer is no. Let me ask you this. Do you know how many of them are terrorists? And I don't want to, Senator, here's my lecture on this. Do you know how many of the 600,000 gotaways were terrorists? Yes or no?
Senator, we are focused on the
You
safety
refuse
and
to answer
security.
that as well. What's the result of massive gotaways? Well, one of the results is drug overdoses. And we now have, last year, over 100,000 overdoses who died, the majority from Chinese fentanyl streaming across the border. Now, you told Senator Cornyn you care, but look what has happened under your policy. When you open up the border to the worst illegal immigration in our nation's history, people die. You claim you care. Mr. Secretary, that is a lie. You know, some months ago, Karine Jean-Pierre stood up at a White House briefing and said, people are not just walking across the border. Was she telling the truth?
Senator, you are
Was she telling the
so
truth?
profoundly disrespecting.
Was she telling
my
the truth?
22 years
Okay,
of government service.
you get to answer questions. You don't
Senator,
get to give speeches.
Senator, I served as a federal prosecutor.
All right,
for
you're
12
refusing
years.
to answer. If you look at, she was lying. And she was not lying on her own. She was lying on behalf of the President of the United States. Now, the photograph of people walking. She was lying on behalf of the President of the United States. This is a photograph from just one day along the Rio Grande of hundreds of thousands of people walking across the border. You have allowed this to happen. The photograph that was before, what are these wristbands?
I don't know what they are.
You don't know what they are. Mr. Secretary, you have just testified to the American people you're incompetent at your job, because I've been to the southern border, and if you go to the southern border, along the southern border, you see thousands of these wristbands because the illegal immigrants wear them. The drug cartels, every color corresponds to how many thousands of dollars they owe the cartels. You have turned these cartels into multi-billion-dollar criminal organizations, and these are modern-day leg irons, because these are children being sold into sex slavery, and you don't even know what they are. That is astonishing. Mr. Secretary, how many children have been sold into sex slavery under your administration?
Senator, we are taking it to the cartels.
How many children have been sold into sex slavery? Do you know how many children have been sold into sex slavery?
To an unprecedented degree.
Mr. Secretary, I want to say to you right now,
it is
your behavior is disgraceful, and the deaths, the children assaulted, the children raped, they are at your feet, and if you had integrity, you would resign. And I will tell you, the men and women of the Border Patrol, they've never had a political leader undermine them. They despise you, Mr. Secretary, because you're willing to let children be raped to follow political orders. This is a crisis, it's a disgrace, and you won't even admit this human tragedy is a crisis.
Claiming 1 minute chairman time, Mr. Secretary, would you like to respond to any of those questions?
What the senator said was revolting. I'm not going to address it.
Your refusal to do your job is revolting. Ms. Peters, one of President Biden's first acts after taking office was to issue Executive Order 14006, mandating that contracts with privately owned detention facilities not be renewed. The order is intended, quote, to decrease incarceration levels by reducing profit-based incentives to incarcerate by phasing out the federal government's reliance on privately operated criminal detention facilities. This order has created many unintended consequences, including the closing of the Willacy County Regional Detention Facility in Raymondville, Texas. The decision has had tremendous negative consequences with little to no obvious upside, forcing inmates to travel hundreds of miles round trip for court appearances, impacting the accessibility of legal counsel, and making family visits significantly more difficult. It has also caused administration issues for the prison system and harmed the local economy by eliminating these jobs. Literally every stakeholder that has a role to play in these cases is opposed to this Biden policy. That includes the defense bar, the federal public defender, the U.S. attorney, even the federal bench. All have publicly asked for this policy to be rescinded. Unfortunately, as with the open borders under Joe Biden, the Biden administration doesn't give a damn about how their woke policies actually affect South Texas or the lives of regular people. Ms. Peters, how has Executive Order 14006 impacted the Bureau of Prisons' ability to house inmates, and has it been a negative impact or a positive impact?
Thank you, Senator. So we were able to come into compliance with the executive order the end of last November, and bring in those individuals from those facilities that were closed, and we were able to safely absorb them into our current population.
Okay, that you didn't answer my question. How has it impacted the BOP, and has it been positive or negative?
Senator, I don't know that I can put it in a positive or negative category. What I can say
is the defense bar and the U.S. attorney and the federal bench, are they all wrong?
I'm not familiar with their opinions and their reasons for opposing.
Okay, unfortunately, you're illustrating that the Biden administration doesn't care about South Texas if you don't even know the impact it's having on all the stakeholders. All right, let's shift to the topic Senator Lee was just asking you about, because I have to say I found your answers to him thoroughly unacceptable. The 2022 Transgender Offender Manual, issued by the Bureau of Prison through your predecessors, reverted back to the Obama administration's initial designation and housing programming assignments. Notably, biological sex at birth is no longer the controlling determinant. Right now today, how many biological males are housed in female prisons under BOP?
Senator, I don't have those numbers in front of me today.
Why don't
but
you?
We could look at them and get back to you.
Why don't you?
I
Did
just
you-
don't have them top of
Did you
mind.
know you were going to be asked that today?
No, Senator.
Oh, you didn't. Have you been asked that before?
On the record, Senator?
Yes.
I don't recall.
You were asked a year ago in writing, and you failed to answer it in writing. You knew damn well you're going to be asked it today, but you don't want to answer it. Senator Lee asked, why don't you report the numbers? You don't report the numbers because you don't want people to know the numbers. So the fact that you sit there and say, I don't know, he said 1,300. Is that number in the ballpark?
1,300 as it relates to which category, Senator?
Biological males housed in female prisons.
No, that would be a much larger number.
Which is a larger number?
So the number of individuals who even identify as transgender at the Federal Bureau of Prisons is around 1,700. And the number of individuals that are housed in institutions not conforming with their biological sex are very low.
Very low. Are we talking 100? Are we talking 10?
We will look at the numbers. We're talking less than 10.
So your testimony here, I just want to understand, your testimony here today is there are fewer than 10 biological males, human beings that were born male, who are housed in female prisons. Is that your testimony?
That is my understanding, and I will confirm that and get back to you.
Okay. Of the 1,700 prisoners you referenced, how many of them are convicted sex offenders?
I do not know the answer to that, Senator.
Are you aware that Great Britain's numbers, according to a January 2022 report, is the proportion of male-born transgender offenders who are sex offenders in the UK prison system is roughly 60%, significantly higher than the 18% of the general population? Are those numbers consistent with the American numbers?
I'm not familiar with Great Britain's numbers.
So let me ask you this. How many female inmates have been sexually assaulted by biological males who BOP has housed in female prisons?
Senator, I would have to look into that and get back to you.
Do you have an obligation to protect those female prisoners?
Absolutely.
And so have you examined how many women have been sexually assaulted by biological males that BOP has placed in the prison with those women?
I have not, Senator, but I will tell you that safety and security and the placement of every individual in our custody is top of mind and the most important.
So if it's top of mind, why haven't you examined how many have been sexually assaulted? This is an obvious question. If you put a man with male genitals, with a male body in a female prison who's a convicted sex offender, it's not rocket science that there's a real risk those women are going to be victims of sexual assault. How is it possible that you haven't even asked the question, how many women are getting sexually assaulted because of the policies of the Biden administration?
Senator, I assure you that safety and security of these individuals are top of mind. And if
So you haven't asked the question?
If there was misconduct, those individuals would be held accountable.
Thank you, Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Secretary Raimondo, the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, the NEPA reviews are currently required for CHIPS grants, and that could lengthen project timelines by 2 years or more from the date the department decides to start an environmental impact statement. Some NEPA reports aren't completed for 7 years or longer. When you were asked about hurdles posed by NEPA to CHIPS projects in a House hearing last month, you pointed out there's currently a bipartisan amendment to the Defense Authorization Act, which would help a lot. So we're going to do everything we can with our team to help streamline NEPA and move it as quickly as is prudent. But if Congress could pass the amendment, I think it's the Cruz-Kelly amendment in the Authorization Act, it would help us a lot to move faster. As you know, that bipartisan amendment passed the Senate with overwhelming bipartisan support, but it is not yet law. It still has to pass the House and ultimately be signed into law by the President. Could you briefly describe the benefits the amendment would provide as a word of encouragement to the House and the White House to make it law?
Yes, thank you. And thank you for your leadership on that. As you say, each of these projects, if they receive federal money, would be subject to NEPA, which could could take up to years. We do not have years. These are national security imperative projects, which is why I, again, thank you for your leadership. What we are doing, we've built a team on the CHIPS team in the Commerce Department just to focus on permitting, to help companies, help states streamline the process, accelerate the process within the existing statute. Let me be clear. We don't want to, environmental concerns matter. We are not in any way suggesting that we should do anything that hurts the environment or is unsustainable. That being said, we do need to, which your amendment would do, streamline the process, speed the process, make the process more efficient and user-friendly. Interestingly, earlier today, I was on the phone with members of the House on this exact issue, encouraging them to do their own, take your lead and pass something in the House. My view is it's essential. We're going to do everything we can. We have a team. We're working on it. But without the legislation, it is very difficult.
Well, that's very helpful. Thank you. Let me turn to the topic of spectrum, something both you and I care a lot about. We all know that the United States needs more commercial access to mid-band spectrum. Recent studies project that U.S. mobile traffic to increase more than 2.5 times over the next 5 years and almost 6-fold in the next 10 years. We need a real mid-band spectrum pipeline so that the U.S. can dominate in 5G and not fall behind our adversaries. Unfortunately, access to mid-band spectrum has become almost impossible to come by because so much of the nation's spectrum is under the control of federal agencies who are resistant to sharing. The Defense Department recently completed its report on opening access to spectrum in the lower 3 gigahertz band and gave it to your department at the end of last week. The report has not been made public, but according to leaks, the report does not support sharing, let alone allowing full-power 5G use in the band. Secretary Raimondo, you and I had a very productive call yesterday, and during that call, you committed to sharing the report with me and briefing me on it. I appreciate that. Do you agree that we need more mid-band spectrum to be made available for 5G, including for full-power use, and that it is not only imperative for our economy, but also for our national security?
I do. Let me say this. As I said yesterday, I think I'd be very happy to have my staff, NTIA, and the DOD, I think we should do it together, to come and go through the report. So we'll set that up.
I appreciate that.
And yes, I do. I spoke with Secretary Austin last week, and I said, the DOD needs the spectrum they need to execute their mission, period. Having said that, we also need to be more creative and innovative about how we share spectrum and how we use spectrum, because the truth of the matter is our national defense depends on, as you say, continued private sector innovation and continued innovation in 5G. And my point to him and my point to you and anyone who wants to hear from me is that this shouldn't be a zero-sum game, right? We shouldn't think every time the DOD shares or gives something up, they're losing capacity. We have to find creative ways where we can have more spectrum made available in the mid-range band, as you say, and also the DOD has what they need to do their mission. And I'm committed to working with you and with them to do that.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Director Panchanathan, during fiscal year 21 and fiscal year 22, the NSF funded some 70 grants and 2 contracts, totaling over $45 million, focused on both the quote-unquote science of countering social media mis- and disinformation, as well as the development of digital tools to track and censor so-called mis- or disinformation. One of the projects was called Expert Voices Together, and it is, to quote the NSF, quote, creating a comprehensive system of care that addresses the harms journalists experience due to online harassment. Its mission, incredibly enough, is to, quote, support journalists in moments of crisis while helping the media industry build resilience long-term. In other words, taxpayer-funded therapy for left-wing journalists who find actual facts traumatizing. I'm sure people like Taylor Lorenz will be excited about that. But where on earth in the NSF's mandate is there a justification for these sorts of projects? And do you believe that venturing into such politicized topics undermines broader support for the NSF?
Senator, first of all, let me tell you that the reach, I hope that through the hearing today, you will get to see NSF's broad impact all across our nation through STEM talent development, through economic vibrancy that NSF makes possible, and yes, national security objectives also being fostered. I hope that the examples that I will give you, and in the answer, I'm not trying to package all of that, but I hope that that will come through very clearly. We're doing a lot of work about how to make sure that talent everywhere and innovation everywhere is energized.
Could you answer the question, though, that I asked?
Yes, I'm just going to come to that, Senator, because I just want to make sure that the NSF mission is, I just want to make sure that that is clearly understood also. I want to say one thing very categorically. NSF does not engage in censorship. We do not regulate any content and engage with anybody who also does so. But what we do is, how do the technologies operate and how are they being used, and provide the public and policymakers the information that they need so that you can make the informed decisions about needed regulations and guardrails, and for the users that they have the tool that they can safely navigate content. That's what NSF is engaged in. That's the kind of projects that we fund. We are not in the business of censorship. We are not in the business of controlling content. I can tell you, for example, even in this conversation that we are having right now, in the deepfake realm, this conversation can be completely altered and presented in a form that you and I will say, how did it even happen? That this conversation that we are having right now has been transformed into something that's even unrecognizable. These kinds of things that happen, we are trying to find how can we build, how can we invest in those projects, and how can we invest in tools and techniques that can help safeguard. And that's all we are doing. We are not censoring. I want to repeat that. We are not altering content.
When you're funding others who are engaged in censorship, you're undermining support for your very important agency.
Senator, maybe I can close with this comment. I'm happy to work with any of you to go through this with you in more of a one-on-one setting and explain what these projects are doing so that it can be helpful. Happy to take your suggestions, happy to take your inputs. NSF, I always say NSF is a learning agency. We learn constantly because we cannot be an agency that says, this is how we do it. We are a learning agency, so happy to take the input and see where, if any, you find that there is, NSF appearing to be, as I have said, we are not, but I'm happy to have the discussion with you.
Thank you.
Senator Tester. All right. We just watched the whole thing. I've sat through a lot of congressional hearings, and this one genuinely got under my skin, and not because of Ted Cruz. Let's start with Attorney General Garland. Cruz asked him a simple legal question. Is it a federal crime to protest outside a judge's home with intent to influence a case? Garland said yes. And then Cruz walked him straight into the corner, because when protesters showed up night after night at the homes of Supreme Court justices after the Dobbs leak, not a single case was brought under that exact statute. Not one. Garland talked about marshals. He talked about protection details. But Cruz asked a specific question. Did you prosecute anyone? And the answer, which Garland could barely bring himself to give, was no. You cannot tell me the law applies equally to everyone when the DOJ selectively enforces it based on which side of the political aisle the victim sits on. That is not justice. That is politics in a suit. Then there is the Mark Houck situation. A pro-life sidewalk counselor had a minor altercation and offered to turn himself in through his attorney. The FBI showed up anyway with 24 agents in body armor, ballistic helmets, shields, and a battering ram pointed at his family. Meanwhile, groups like Jane's Revenge are firebombing pregnancy centers across the country, and the DOJ found one group to prosecute. One. Garland's own answer when asked how many attacks there had been was a lot. That contrast tells you everything about where this department's priorities are. Now the border. This is where I genuinely felt something watching this. Mayorkas could not or would not say the word crisis. 3 letters. 1 syllable. The head of Border Patrol said it under sworn deposition without hesitation. But Mayorkas gave us significant challenge, every single time like he was reading off a PR script. Cruz showed him the data. Migrant deaths nearly tripling. Gotaways jumping from 180,000 to 600,000 a year. And Mayorkas didn't even know how many people had died on his watch. The number is 853. And the Secretary of Homeland Security did not know that. That is not just a political failure. That is a competence failure. Then there were the wristbands. Mayorkas said he didn't know what they were. Those wristbands are cartel debt markers. Every color represents thousands of dollars owed by migrants, including children, who are essentially owned by the cartel until that debt is cleared. They are modern-day shackles. And the man responsible for border security looked at them and said he didn't know what they were. I don't know how you watch that moment and feel anything other than disbelief. The Iran and Ukraine section is something a lot of people will skip over, and they really shouldn't. Cruz made a specific and damning argument. While the Biden administration sends aid to Ukraine, it is simultaneously allowing Iran to sell over 1 million barrels of oil a day, letting its ghost tanker fleet grow from 70 to 300 ships, and signing waivers that enable Russia and Iran to conduct nuclear cooperation together. Blinken's own transmissions to Congress acknowledged those waivers would expand Iran's nuclear program and deepen cooperation between Iran and Russia. He signed them anyway. If that is not funding both sides of a conflict, I genuinely don't know what is. Now I know some of you will say Cruz is grandstanding. Maybe there is some of that. Politicians are politicians. But the questions were fair. They were specific. Most of them were yes or no questions. And the officials sitting across from him refused to answer. When you dodge a direct question under oath in front of the American people, what you are really saying is that the honest answer makes you look bad. That is not grandstanding from Cruz. That is accountability, and it is rare. What stayed with me after watching all of this is that none of it is abstract. These are real consequences. Dead migrants, threatened justices, firebombed clinics, trafficked children, and a foreign policy that contradicts itself. Cruz brought charts, statutes, sworn testimony, and direct quotes. He was met with evasion and talking points. The bar for public officials should be high. Today I watched several of them duck right under it. What moment hit you hardest? For me, it was Mayorkas and the wristbands. That one moment said more than the rest of the hearing combined. Drop a comment, share the video, and I'll see you in the next one.